Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen. I'm the Executive Director here at the Harriet Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate people about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's special event is entitled Across Continents and Generations, Poetry as Memory and Witness, and features the acclaimed poets Julia Kolchinsky and Luisa Muradyan. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, economic, social, psychological, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. The event today is part of the 2025-26 KHC National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention: Academics and Artists Escaping Nazism, and it's co-sponsored by 7 organizations around the country. Come on in. Welcome. Those organizations include the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University, the Reef Center for Human Rights and Conflict Resolution at Christopher Newport University, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, the Ray Walpaugh Institute for the Study of Crimes Against Humanity, the Holocaust, and Genocide at Western Washington University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan University, the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention at Binghamton University, and the Martin Springer Institute at Northern Arizona University. I'd like to thank our colleagues from Media Services, Phil Roncaroni and Jesse Pina, as well as Verona Soman, the KHC's museum coordinator. Before we begin, a reminder for everyone here to please turn off your phones. And after the presentation, we'll host a Q&A. So for those of you here, we'll pass around a mic. It's really important for you to ask your question in the microphone. We also have an online audience. And for those of you watching online, please be sure to put your question in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So it's now my pleasure to introduce one of this year's KHC NEH Faculty Fellows, Professor Allison Cimino. Professor Cimino teaches composition and creative writing here at Queensborough as a full-time lecturer in English. For many years, she facilitated poetry workshops for educators through Lesley University's Education Program, Division of Creative Arts and Learning, where she taught a graduate class on arts, integrated learning, and poetry. Professor Cimino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. And thank you to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, Queensborough Community College, Luisa, Muradyan, and Julia Kolchinsky for being here with us today. Welcome to everybody joining us on Zoom, and a special welcome to all of the faculty and students who who came today, and the Creative Writing Club students who came today as well. It's very nice to have you all here. It's an honor to be with you all today as part of the NEH Colloquium Series, Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention, Artists and Academics Escaping Nazism. Dr. Beth Cunahan, Professor of English, and Dr. Mark Zelser, Assistant Professor of Philosophy and Social Sciences, are the 2 additional fellows who joined me in organizing this year's colloquium. In 1933, as Hitler consolidated power, thousands of Jewish and dissident artists and academics faced persecution, not only from Nazi anti-Semitism, but also from the regime's totalitarian control over culture and society. As Nazism spread, many painters, writers, filmmakers, and scholars sought refuge in Europe and the United States through restrictive and anti-Semitic immigration policies often blocked their escape. This series explores the history, contributions, and lasting impact of those who escaped. Additionally, the series highlights the resistance and creative works that emerged from their survival. Please join me in a moment of silence in remembrance of those who did not escape Nazi religious, intellectual, and artistic persecution, and those impacted by the Holocaust. Thank you. It is a great joy to introduce Luisa, Muradyan, and Julia Kolchinsky for our reading, Across Continents and Generations, Poetry as Memory and Witness. Our esteemed guests today came to the United States from Ukraine in the 90s as Jewish refugees and are both descendants of Holocaust survivors. Thank you to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center and Laura Cohen for making this reading possible and for the generous gifts of books to our students. In addition to thanking my colleagues and the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, I'd like to say something about camaraderie. I'd like to thank my friend and poetry mentor, Kathleen Pierce, who introduced me to Luisa, also her student, and to her work. When I first met Luisa to discuss our colloquium series and invite her to read, she immediately suggested we invite Julia Kolchinsky. I'm so grateful to Luisa for introducing me to Julia and to her work. This is a true sense of camaraderie here in these introductions. I am thrilled now to introduce these writers to my own students at Queensborough. Both poets explore what it means to be alive in times of abundance and devastation, of moments of being in family and in lineage. Their poems resonate with Muriel Rukeyser's definition of poetry as she defines it in Life of Poetry. She writes, "I know that our sufferings and our concentrated joy, our states of plunging far and dark, turning to come back to the world, so that the moment of intense turning seems still and universal, all are here in a music like the music of our time, like the hero, like the anonymous forgotten, and there is exchange here in which our lives are met and created." These three terms of relationship, poet, poem, and witness, are none of them static. We are changing living beings, experiencing the interchange of poetry. Luisa Muradyan is originally from Odessa, Ukraine, and is the author of I Make Jokes When I'm Devastated, When the World Stopped Touching, and American Radiance. She holds a PhD in poetry from the University of Houston and won the 2017 Roz Shoemaker Prairie Schooner Book Prize. Julia Kolchinsky is the author of 4 poetry collections, The Many Names for a Mother, finalist for the Jewish Book Award, Don't Touch the Bones, 40 Weeks, and PARALLAX, finalist of the Miller-Williams Prize. Her next book, When the World Stopped Touching, is a collaboration between these two poets. Please welcome Julia Kolchinsky.
Hello, everybody. For war and water. Everyone is having boys, my mother said. That means war is coming. The way it came in the old country, boys rising out of the ice and cold potato fields, boys laying bricks and digging wells and trenches and bodies. Boys out of other boys, born the year before cops killed even more black boys, and boys killed other boys for loving boys. And more swastikas showed up on walls, and more walls went up where once ran rivers. But a river is not a boy. A river can either run dry or bleed, and everyone will blame someone, darker or an animal, the gorilla who stole a little boy, or the gator who dragged away another. But in the water, these boys seem strong, resilient even. These boys born months apart who beat the water with their tiny fists and kick as though they're running. These boys who grow not knowing they were born for war and that it's everywhere and there is no outrunning water. So that is a poem from my first book of poetry. And what I would like to do for you all is to give a little bit of a historical context. And I'm going to make sure to share this on the Zoom as well. A brief historical context about the Holocaust in the East, in the former Soviet Union. Because we're all coming to this historical background with different levels of knowledge, and most often the narrative that is taught in schools is that of the Holocaust in the West and the concentration camps. And of the 6 million Jews who died, half of them, 3 million, were murdered in the East. Not by concentration camp, but what is known as the Holocaust or the Shoah by bullets. And so it's just going to be very brief, and then we'll return to the poems, but I think it'll be helpful. So in June 1941, 2 years after World War II started, 2 years after the invasion of Poland, Operation Barbarossa happened. Up until that point, Hitler and Stalin had a pact that as long as Hitler didn't invade the Soviet Union would be safe from being involved in the war. But in June of 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, and so the map shows the soldiers marching. The issue is that the Soviet Union and Ukraine, the territory we think of as Ukraine, or the country of Ukraine, the Pale of Settlement, there were a lot of Jews there. But to get those Jews to the concentration camps, there was no infrastructure, right? There were no trains, there was nothing to get them there. So what happened is there were the Einsatzgruppen, which were military squads, local militia, that were headed up by Nazis, but made up of collaborators on the ground. And the violence in these areas was much more intimate, proximate. It was often committed by one's own neighbors and community members. I'm going to show a couple of images that are more graphic. As Dr. Cohen said, please take care of yourself. If you need to look away, I'm not trying to inflict harm. So this is an image of the Shoah by bullets, particularly of Babin Yar, which is the atrocity I'm going to talk about, the largest two-day massacre. This is just an image of the intimacy of violence. And this is an image of mass grave sites, of which we are still uncovering them. These are just some of the many mass graves that are undocumented, but that proliferate Eastern Europe, where individuals would just be shot, and bodies would fall one on top of the other. And here are my great-grandparents, and the reason I write about this history, this is Vera in Sima in 1935. When Operation Barbarossa happened, they had to evacuate. So I have this area that shows the evacuation, which is very far south in the Ural Mountains. My grandmother was 2 months old at the time, and my great-grandmother evacuated with her, her sister, 2 sets of aging grandparents. But my great-grandfather Simha, he stayed in Kiev and fought as a partisan fighter. And partisans were local, again, militias that were not a part of the formal army. This is what we think is their final photo together in 1941. You can really see the shift in expressions from 1935. And this is Babin Yar, the massacre of over 33,000 Jews between September 29th and September 30th. And for many years, my family assumed that this is where my great-grandfather was murdered. And by the time this mass grave was exhumed, they had found 100,000 bodies. And this is just an aerial shot to show you what Babin Yar is. It is a giant pit, like a cavern, where they would line up bodies, shoot them, and then bodies would fall one on top of the other. And here is present-day Babin Yar, where there is now a monument and a Jewish cemetery. So I have scoured the archives to find my great-grandfather's name, and it is missing from every single archive. So let's return to poetry, and I will try to tell you the story in poems. Inheritance. I wish I remembered my great-grandmother's gaze, the time she spoke turned inward, beyond where we are so alike, the first time she told this story, the room too warm, too thick with honeyed light, and I too young for her to think that I was listening. Her features wear me now, the mole on my left shoulder, soft, uneven hips. I see her husband in them. They echo his final vestige, taken away from a kitchen in Kiev, the last place he looked for her before the neighbor whispered Żyd, and their house was left empty until the war ended and great-grandmother came back to mourn his unfound body, her hollowed home, the city where he may have died. All her silences and stories, full, I grew with them. Full, I'll pass uncertainty to my children, told or retold, history or memory, until one, a fading pulsar star, bleeds between stellar glow and blackening sky. And in that distance, who can tell, ignited times apart, the sundial's shadow at noon, the lived and the passed down. I'm wishing again today, still last night, in flux like sand and water and ancestry. I'm wishing for her to have told me his name. Wounded, pocked, shot through, he walks beside me now, so close sometimes I think I feel his hand. His body glows with stars, blood stars. In a voice without gender or race, I hear him call, and I am one among the many, a blood star, and my children, we will be the passing of light, body to body. We wear our people's blood and smear the sky with it, so when the rest look up, they too will see nothing but faces in the clouds. So this image that you see before you of my great-grandfather and this big book of names, this is an exhibit at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Museum in Poland, where I went to do 3 weeks of research. And at the time, I was pregnant with my son. And I came up to this big book, and I expected his name to be there, but it wasn't. So this is the page where his name would have been. So this next poem is about that experience of going to the death sites in Poland while pregnant. And one thing to know about the particular summer that I was there in 2015 is it was the hottest summer on record. And so in Auschwitz, they put up sprinklers in front to cool down the tourists. But this was a really kind of perverse and uneducated gesture to put sprinklers in a place where those sprinklers had once inflicted murder. Against naming, let's not name her or compare flesh to fruit. Let's joke instead how she swallowed a seed and let it grow inside her. Just imagine how heavy is that sound and what it must taste like in ripe summertime heat. I had no cravings though, only wanted to touch the cold or be touched. Polish berries carried winter, so I ate them by the bucket. Gooseberries, currants, sour cherries, bursting childhood in my mouth. A past made sweeter by its being past. My mother sweating through Tolkuchka, the little push and shove bazaar, only to come home with a stained skirt and fruit dangling from her ears and me hungry inside her. The Krakow market was a harvest too. And on the hottest July on record, in Auschwitz, the camps didn't know what to do with all the people in such heat. So at the gates of Auschwitz, sprinklers appeared. For the children mostly, and you, my love, were just about the size of a heart inside me then, soft and wanting water and a past that isn't this, one not passed down. But I carried you there anyways, against my family's urges, against your future ones maybe, walked you miles across black ground, turned red, then gray, then left for colorless, the dead around us silent, the ones beneath us growing, and I sang to you of a golden lion and a flame-maned star. Под небом голубым есть город золотой с прозрачными воротами и яркою звездой. You listened, my love. Perhaps they did too. Ashes rising in the creek and in Birkenau's wildflowers. Its big book of names from which we did not choose to name you. But V for the survivor who refused to be named that. Valen, valiant, strong, unmarked by ancestry or first generation or Slavic or fruit. For the numbered and unnumbered names, unwritten and scattered there. For the woman who made seeds grow as gorgeous out of flesh as out of stone. So I'm gonna stop sharing the PowerPoint now. There we go. And I'm gonna turn to a few poems from my recent book that some of you have read. Thank you so much for spending time with these poems. You have no idea how much this means to me and Luisa. And this book is, of course, carrying this intergenerational trauma and history, but it is focused on raising my son, who is neurodiverse on the autism spectrum, while also grappling with what it is to bear witness to the war in my birthplace, to the war in Ukraine. And watching my son be kind of fascinated in his mind and his body with violence, while physically struggling to bear this violence at a distance for myself. I do not mention the war to my 6-year-old son, but somehow his body knows. My face in his hands before bed, he asks, if I cut you in half, will you be even? I am silent, expecting mothers in Mariupol are cut by invisible hands, children cut off from water, because you have 2 eyes, plus 2 ears, plus 2 cheeks, plus so much hair. Plus, your mouth can have 2 halves, so you'd be even, right? He wants simple math, breath that outlasts violence. You divided by 2 equals 2 even yous. He isn't asking anymore. He is making me monument. You would still be if I cut you in half. Small hands demand a splitting. If you cut me in half, I tell him, I'd be dead. This next poem is about the first day that Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th of 2022. And I was living in Arkansas at the time, and an ice storm had happened in Arkansas. So my children were home from school, and they happened to be watching the show Masha and the Bear. Has anyone watched Masha and the Bear? I highly recommend. It's fantastic, fantastic, right? And it's available on Netflix. You can watch it. You can actually no longer watch it in Russian on Netflix because Netflix cut that off. Rightfully so, I think. You can still watch it in Russian on YouTube if you would like, so don't worry. So this is Watching Masha и Медведь as Russia invades Ukraine. Mishka, no Mishka, blares in Russian through one ear as CNN coverage of the first day missiles falling on my birthplace echoes through a blue earbud in the other. My children are on the couch drinking their morning milk and stuffing their mouths full of warm croissants, watching a blonde Slavic girl wrap a giant bear around her finger. Mishka, she tenderly calls, little bear, and he reluctantly does whatever is asked, prepares elaborate meals of kashas with dried fruits and homemade cherry, currant, gooseberry preserves and stroganoffs and stews and smoked fish and 5 kinds of potatoes. And if she but whispers in her small, high-pitched voice, Mishka, he will carry her and a menagerie of animals in his big, bare arms across a swamp and field of sunflowers to safety. More missiles fall on Kyiv. The airport in the city I was born is bombed. I don't remember it. My Dnipro, the home where I collected chestnuts by the Dnieper River, or ate small spheres of ice cream from a shop called Pingvin, or held my mother's hand when the streets flooded and she lifted me up to walk the rim of rusted fountains. Incoming call from Dom, meaning home, interrupts the news. Mama tells me she finally reached her childhood friend. They spoke as shells fell, and maybe Marina could see fires through her window. My mother never thought this would happen. None of us did. The subway stations turned bomb shelters the way they were in the war her parents lived through and grandparents died fighting. Not while there are those still alive to remember, she said. How could he do this while they are still alive? She repeats this to her mother over tea and tears and disbelief. They thought they'd never have to endure it again. Ice falls in Arkansas. My children demand another snack. End episode of Masha in their mother's tongue, my mother tongue. This mouthful of history we chew and chew until it chokes us. And so this poem is, really dealing with the fact that Russian, the language that's native to both Luisa and I, that we grew up speaking, is the language of the oppressor. And yet we don't speak Ukrainian. And I'm going to end with a villanelle for my poets in the room who like to write in form. I love writing in form and would love to talk to you about form because what I think form allows us to do is to contain something uncontainable, to quantify something unquantifiable. When the emotion is so intense, form lets us manage it, lets us have a vessel for dealing with it. And so on every anniversary of the war, I have written a poem in form. And this is 1 year later, but it might as well be 2 years later, or 3 years later, or now, unfortunately, 4 years later. 1 year later. It's easy to look away from war when your wallet's empty and the sink is full. When the land and people aren't yours, when your children scream for more of you, when your body's pulled, it's easy to look away from war. The soil across the water to earth's core brims blood, but look, the sunflowers still bloom when the land and people aren't yours. So you focus on the daily chores, dig out a trench of laundry, linens, wools. The land and people aren't yours. Your children speak a stranger's tongue at school with a dog barking, mailman at the door. How does a house become a shore no news can reach? Are we that cruel? Or is it just that easy to look away from war when the land and people aren't yours? Thank you.
Hello. Hi, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for spending time with the poems. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Kathleen, if you're out there, for introducing me to Laura. This is just, it's a really incredible opportunity for us, and we're so thankful to be here and feel so passionate about how important this work is that this center does. So thank you all. I'm gonna sort of roll right into my poems just after Julia gave some good historical background. So my family, my grandmother's family, they lived in a small Jewish village outside of Odessa. And then my grandmother's mother escaped. They found out in the middle of the night that an execution force was coming the next day, so they grabbed my grandmother, my grandmother's brother. So it was two sisters, and they just grabbed their kids, and they escaped through the forest and ended up finding themselves on a train and ended up in Uzbekistan. That's one of my grandmother's stories. And everyone who was left in that village, to include My great-grandfather was murdered the next day, and then the great-grandparents that were there were, from the family lore that we heard later from neighbors, they were forced to first dig the hole that they would then be shot into. And so, but again, that Holocaust by bullets is distinct to where we're from. But as a side product, my grandmother, as she has aged, is very invested and passionate about choosing where she is buried, the circumstances of how that is memorialized. And so we have weirdly spent a lot of time like looking at tombstone catalogs, which is totally a very morbid thing you can do. So this is a poem sort of about that. And this was written right after several Jewish cemeteries had been just destroyed and desecrated locally here. And then later on during the war, that happened quite a bit in Ukraine. But this is called Raptor. My grandmother wants a bird on her grave. And I say wants, not wanted, because she is still alive flipping through the tasteful tombstone catalog. To be clear, there are 25 different birds you can place on top of yourself when you die. Yes, there are the predictably delicate doves and symbolic sparrows, but my grandmother is interested in something more predatory. The hawk kills with its claws, the falcon mouth first. The marshal will snap a man's arm in half, and a stellar can consume a baby seal. There are 5 types of eagles that will steal your toddler. When they cleared out her village in 1941, my grandmother survived by jumping on a train to the mountains. Her mother and mother's mother buried birdless back in Ukraine. My grandmother now, shaking in her gold cardigan, lifting her arms up towards the Kansas sky, winged raptor, feathered Moses, resurrected and in rage. Cremation. Teach me how to sing the childhood song where we scream about ashes and we all fall down. I am a child in Pompeii, running my hands across statues and laughing away I no longer know how. In Odessa, the dead walk the streets and the living watch from behind closed gates. My grandmother hid in that basement there. Here, hell is fire, grandfather sent to Siberia, years of hard labor brings people closer to God. Heaven is full of convicts with broken backs. After chopping wood for 20 years, ask for fire. Your door is made from wood. Press your ear against it and listen to the sound a hatchet makes. If you wake up in a world of ash, remember you have reached God in your own way. Cumulonimbus, Cirrus stratus, once had eyes like you. And then this is the last poem I'm going to read from my first book, American Radiance, which those 2 other poems were from there. And this one, you know, we sort of think about the Holocaust as this sort of thing that happened. But a lot of the roots, especially of the anti-Semitism in the former Soviet Union and at the time the Tsarist Empire, had a lot of sort of anti-Semitic laws that were just part of the sort of the way that society functioned. And one of them, in the major cities, Jewish people were not really allowed after the sunset. And so in Odessa, the last train out of Odessa was at 7:40. And so it turned into this sort of folk song, the Samsorek, 7:40, Samsorek. Julia is the singer. But it's like this weirdly like resilient, but also somewhat dark, morbid song that is like performed at weddings if you go to a wedding from people from that region. So this is a poem about that, 7:40, or Samsorek for the Russian speakers in the room. Julia. My students complain when I choose the music for classy music Mondays, and I sway them with endearing catchphrases like, I'll be Bach. But even then, I wonder about the fuss of an aria or the humor behind a sonata or what kind of instrument I would turn myself into. The truth is, I'd like to be a piccolo or a French horn, but I lived my life as a trombone and was raised by a drum. My mother banging her hand on the table, begging the Kansas string band to learn the 740, a popular Jewish folk song from Odessa, the song that even my parents danced to at their Soviet wedding, where God was not allowed, only invoked among the pickled tomatoes, a song that was sung every evening before 8 p.m. Every evening as Jews all over the city rushed to the last train out of Odessa. 7:10, the sun begins to fade. 7:20, our goods are packed. 7:30, warm up the band. 7:40, our legs are running. 7:40, I'm singing songs. 7:40, we are packed like rats in train cars. 7:40, we dance in a circle. 7:40, my mother slapped in school. 7:40, my mother changing her name. 7:40, I marry a Gentile. 7:40, don't tell them who or what you are. 7:40, a trombone. 7:40, I'm screaming like a train. 7:40, who comes for me at the end of the night. 7:40, what is the difference between a song and a scream? 7:40, the conductor is nowhere to be found. 7:40, look how joyfully we disappear. So this is actually a newer poem that does not live in a book, and I always do my best to read at least one new poem every time I read, just to make myself feel like I'm still doing poems, I guess. And this one is, it's got a Holocaust reference, but it's also just I sitting in dentist offices and looking at the art, because I find I'm a big museum person, but also equally invested in just your really streamlined, what people choose to put on the walls of their often doctors' offices. So this is a poem in response to that. A ekphrastic poem in response to dentist office art. The streets of Europe are lined with inspiration. You can be bludgeoned by beauty simply by sitting at a cafe and witnessing gods in the shape of fountains and the passing of clouds over endless monuments. But I left my country years ago and now sit in one dentist's office after another and let the art on the walls drill into my psyche. This portrait of pit bulls playing cards makes me think of my grandfather, who was more dog than husband to my grandmother, or more card player than caregiver to my mother. On the other side of the wall is a cartoon of a vampire getting his teeth cleaned, and I laugh because I like my art with fangs. My grandmother survived the Holocaust to become a dentist, and I chew on this memory of her with her hands in my mouth, pulling teeth as if they were radishes that only wanted to stay where they were planted. The dusty landscape of sunflowers brings me back to Ukraine. The reality, of course, is that I had never left at all. Okay. All right. How am I doing on time? What do we think? What's the time looking like? Oh, I'm doing okay. I'm proud of myself. Hope you guys are proud of me too. Okay, terrible at times if you can't tell. Okay, I'm gonna start with just the title poem from my newer book, I Make Jokes When I'm Devastated. I make jokes when I'm devastated. If you walk the stations of the cross, most tour guides will politely point out the spot where they think Jesus may have fallen, or the spot where he may have met his mother. This holy place may have been a few meters west or possibly in that gift shop over there. We live in a world of close enough. The missiles that fell on the village did not directly hit my grandmother's childhood home, but they were close enough. The invaders claimed they did not mean to bomb Babin Yar, but their shells were close enough. My great-grandmother wasn't that Jewish, but she was close enough. When you ask me for another response to tragedy, I tend to begin with a joke, which isn't exactly the shape of sorrow, but I assure you, it is close enough. This poem, I'm a big Gerald Stern fan, and something I always am sort of negotiating in my work is humor and tragedy, how to sort of write simultaneously about these things, because for me, I can't reconcile the tragedy without first sort of taking the corridor of humor to get there. You might pick up on this with some of my poems. But who really opened that window for me was reading Gerald Stern's work, who was able to sort of vacillate between the sort of wide spectrum of human emotion in so many of his poems. And so like reading his poems was like just incredibly transformative for me as a writer. And when he died recently, I sat down and wrote a poem about Jerry, but also sort of in response and in conversation with a really famous poem of his about sort of mourning and what it meant to sort of reconcile that process of loss. And his poem is Behaving Like a Jew, and so this poem is sort of in conversation with that. Instead of ascending, I was going to write a poem where I make love to the fields. I would note that the dandelions just needed someone to blow them, and that grass was best when wet and bowed over in pleasure. But instead of ascending into the world of the pastoral, I will behave like a Jew and mourn the dead bird in my driveway, a fledgling who had fallen out of its nest, pushed out by invaders, by those who would erase its song and tiny dancing wings. I lay down next to her and saw the sky how she saw it, empty of anything worth writing about, except, of course, the body of her mother. So like, since I read a poem that ended with a reference to my mother, I feel like I have to read a poem about my mother, just if she's out there. She might be out there. And this one is a poem. For a long time, I really struggled to write about familial trauma in a way that felt like I could say the complicated thing out loud. And so I was able to sort of start doing that work by sort of wrapping it in a lot of pop culture references or bad jokes and things like that. So this one's titled My Mother as Tom Cruise. Or as every other late 80s action hero, my mother successfully jumping off of a skyscraper onto another skyscraper, my mother hunting the predator with a cigar lodged in her mouth, my mother saying son of a bitch in the coolest way imaginable, my mother ripping a mask off to reveal that she is not in fact the president of the United States, but that she is in fact my mother somehow knowing how to pilot a helicopter, my mother pulling her abusive father out of a bathtub, my mother slamming her fist down on the table during an arm wrestling tournament, my mother registering her hands as lethal weapons, my mother pleading with her mother to leave before things got dangerous, my mother watching things get dangerous, my mother holding the green wire and the blue wire and figuring out which wire to cut. My mother covered in her mother's blood. My mother, my God, my mother walking away from a burning car. My mother, an action hero that self-destructs, and yet she's still my mother, sitting in front of a villain, calmly explaining to him that death is almost here without sharks, without bombs. My mother, pale as the moonlight. My mother, watching him die slowly in explosive peace and immeasurable quiet. Okay, I'm gonna read just maybe like two more poems or so, maybe 3 poems, but these are short. Okay. This poem, I teach students, and I took a group of students. There was a traveling exhibit on Auschwitz that sort of went city to city. And when they came to Kansas City, I took some of my students there. And when I finished with it, I got an email asking from them asking me to rate my experience. So I was like, I got to write about that. The Auschwitz exhibit asks me to rate my experience. We stand in the grand hall that last month was a traveling dinosaur exhibit. On the wall where they have now painted barbed wire, I see traces of what must have been an outline of a bone. What happened to them? My grandmother still won't tell me what she saw in that forest. The next room is a train station, and the next is a ditch we can call a grave or a horror or whatever language brought me to the portrait of a child, the same age as my son. Then I'm gonna read 2 more. I feel like we've been talking a lot about cemeteries, but something, when my family immigrated, something that sort of happens often when your whole family leaves is, I have a lot of family members buried in the same plot in Ukraine and Odessa, and when you leave, somebody has to continue to care for that. And so my grandmother, it's not uncommon to send money to someone in Ukraine who like takes your payment, and then like once a month they'll go clean the cemetery and make sure that your gravesite is well taken care of. And so this is sort of a poem about that. Each month, my grandmother sends money to a stranger who puts flowers on her mother's gravesite in Odessa. There are days I believe that nothing is sacred, that we will destroy ourselves as a form of hope, and days when the dead birds in my driveway agree with me. As a child, I had hoped for something more than this. But tonight, my daughter lets me rock her to sleep. She too is suspicious of what she will inherit and wraps her entire hand around my thumb. I would give anything to take care of you forever. And I know that this too is a lie. She pays what she can and is sent a photo each month of a gravestone with fresh lilies. I can't tell her the stranger is sending her the same photo. 6 lilies, 1 green vase, half-broken fence, and the dead giveaway, the same yellow tail of a cat, body just out of frame. When they bombed the cemetery, the picture of the lilies continued to show up in her mailbox, and I continued to assure her that this was money well spent. They, of course, took everything, but these flowers will last forever. And then, okay. And I'm gonna read one more, and this will be my last one. And this is a poem that is very much about my parents coming to the United States, myself also, and this sort of, when we got here, my parents had to very quickly, we came as refugees and they needed a job like immediately. And my mother in Odessa didn't drive because we just had like, we would take the bus. It was not everybody drove, and that wasn't uncommon. So she had to learn to drive exceedingly fast. And so part of the Missouri driver's license test was you had to be able to parallel park a car. And since I know this is New York, a lot of you guys are like, that's not hard. But this was tough for my mom. And so my parents bent some creative rules. I don't know legally if I should go into too much more than this, but it's been a while. It's been a while. I bet she could pass that test now. Anyway, this is called Light Crimes, a Love Story, because I like to end my set on a love thing. I don't know. Okay. It was our second week in the United States, and my mother needed to learn how to drive so she could get a job mopping floors. My father borrowed a white van from the community center where he mopped floors and boiled spaghetti on Italian night. And maybe you don't see it at first, but this story is romantic. The middle of the night, 2 young immigrants in love in an alleyway, matching leather jackets, and my mother's red lips shining in the moonlight. No, not shining, but radiating like a neon sign that said open. Did she scratch the car on purpose? Or was she unsure of how to parallel park? The answer didn't matter, because the next day my sleepless father followed the driving test instructor, noted the 25 feet marked by orange cones, and knew he could not teach my mother how to place a vehicle in between them. You see, she was not born to fit in arbitrary spaces. She needed room for her hair and her eyes and her voice that my father often says fills a room like an ocean fills a fish tank immediately until everyone is drowning in beauty. Instead, he committed some light crimes and moved the cones minutes before her turn to take the driving test. And listen, I know you want me to tell you whether or not she passed or whether or not my father was arrested, but all I can say is that she wore her fur coat and aviator sunglasses that day. And my father watched her from that borrowed van thinking she looked Technicolor, an American movie star playing the role of a woman with no way to return home.
All right, friends, so now we're going to do something that's somewhat, unique, I think, in poetry readings. We are going to read from our forthcoming collection called When the World Stopped Touching, where we, it was pandemic, and I had a 6-month-old. And Luisa had a 3-month-old, and I texted her one day, and I was like, okay, how are you doing? She's like, I'm drowning. And I said, what if, get this, we write poems to each other? And what did you say?
No. But Julia is persistent. Herself a persistent friend.
Yeah. And so I was like, all right, that's fine. How about I write you one and we see what happens? And what do you know? We wrote poems back and forth to each other for a year. So we're going to start with our Yom HaShoah poems that we wrote on Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day. Dear El, he peed himself twice yesterday, twice today, just steps away from the toilet. He's doing it on purpose, El, I swear. He knows he'll be 5 November 8th. And some days he wants a Black Panther party, and other days a Harry Potter one, but always the cake and candle and wish. He has more wishes, El, than hairs I've pulled out of my head with both hands. I always thought this was just an expression, but no, it's a mother body's compulsion. After the second pee, I tried to force diapers onto his lanky body, already the size of a schoolboy. He screamed and kicked, "Yani baby, not a baby, not a baby." So I gave up on such punishment, already guilty for even letting my hands try it. But today, El, 2 hours of refusal and piss on the floor, and all the threats and promises, all the wishes shattered in the bits of my favorite pastel pink Don't Go Bacon My Heart mug. I shoved Mickey and Pluto pull-ups over his thighs, snug, not painful, and tore my throat, yelling minutes before he fell quietly asleep while I dug my hands into my head on the stairs. This is not complaint, El. I know you've had such days and far worse. It's not that bad, we tell ourselves, and hours later, we read poems about our dead ancestors while our children scream in the background, raging against our history already inside them, against an isolation that is the antonym of Jewish family. And I think how my babushka loves to tell me they barely had enough money for underwear after the war, how she had no childhood and still she pities how hard I have it. She wrote me tonight that my Yom HaShoah reading put tears inside her soul. Держись, she said, держись, hold on, be healthy. So I say, El, in our ancestral, unending present tense, our generational imperative, держись, держись, держись. We have so much to hold.
Dear Jay, I can't help but think that my son is the same age as my grandmother, and I am the same age as my great-grandmother when I hold his body tightly and run towards the field of trees behind our yard. And here, there are only wild turkeys whirling their strange music in the sunlight, and not a symphony of bullets ripping open bodies of woodland creatures. It's what she remembered, Jay. One moment, a red tail brighter than the burning bush, so bright she was struck by its beauty, and then the world erupting in darkness. By the time they reached the train, everyone on board was dying. The conductor shoveled bodies off of cars as if he was unloading firewood. Another memory, but not as searing as the red tail. She thinks it was a squirrel, maybe something from one of her picture books. Perhaps she imagined it, not yet a writer, but already knowing the importance of beauty as a means of survival. By the time they arrived at the mountains, my great-grandmother had already lost her husband, her mother, her aunts, her brothers. I let my son walk toward the turkeys, and they let him too. No one is afraid here, and the air is golden.
Dear El, just imagine one day we will ask our children, remember when the whole world stopped touching? They'll hug us and answer, no.
Dear Jay, I can't decide what I'm more afraid of. My son barreling across the room to hug strangers, or my son barreling back away from others, permanently terrified of touch. Dear Jay, today I made chocolate chip cookies with my son. To date, we have made brownies, khachapuri, pelmeni, vareniki, vanilla cake, and trays full of Jell-O that we never eat but use to bury the bodies of plastic dinosaurs. I can't describe the look on my mother's face when she saw through the screen the games we make of our food. El, food is not a toy. There was so little for so long. Aren't you ashamed? And Jay, I am so ashamed. So much shame I cannot undo in the kitchen. Like the cake I had planned to bake for my 16th birthday, the first year I wanted to try making a Napoleon all by myself. I waited all day, dreaming of layers upon layers in my classes. When the bell rang, I ran out to the parking lot, and a boy who had pretended to be my friend shoved me into his car to give me a birthday present. Jay, it was what I told him I always wanted. An easy bake oven, something from my childhood that my parents could never afford. And Jay, it was covered in swastikas. And Jay, he found a doll that looked like me. She had my dark hair, my eyes. My God, he shoved her inside. He must have spent some time forcing her plastic legs through the oven door. Even now, I can't breathe. Even now, I don't know how I got home. I just remember running. I didn't bake for years. I didn't tell my mother why. But here I am watching my son crack an egg in his toddler way. He separates the yolk from the white and beams at me with his new skill. I put my hand on his shoulder, and right now, for at least this moment, the kitchen is quiet.
Dear El, this is harder than the war, my babushka says. I question her memory. What hard has come to mean almost 30 years past immigration, 75 past famine? I never went hungry, she tells me, remembering their balcony, the length of many communal apartments. Komunalki, a name sounding more like a slur for a woman who loves too eagerly than a shared living space. But maybe love is learning how to share a bathroom with strangers who become family. Here, neighbors hoard toilet paper. Here, we struggle to keep family from turning strange. I was eating matzah, she continues. Next, I expect violence, a bloody Jewish nose or torn skirt. A boy tore it out of my hands, she says. He was just that hungry. And I hear pity in her voice, El, as though she would have given him the stale, unrisen crust. This, too, I'm not sure I believe. Your babushka was never touched, she's told me, by any hands she didn't want. And this, El, this I know I don't believe. You see, she worked in kitchens, nights sometimes, serving soldiers, always making sure her children were fed. Oh God, El, if babushka read this, she'd never forgive me. The mere suggestion of violation is enough. I have to wear a mask, she says, just to walk through the apartment building now. It's so uncomfortable. She hates being touched by anything not of her blood, loves kissing her children's cheeks, grandchildren's necks, and her great-grandbaby's pink forehead, teaching her how to bring it so gently towards her. Baram, 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 boots. Ram, 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 boom. Maybe this is where difficulty really comes from, longing for such slow collision of body. Baram, 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 boots. I bring the baby's head as close as possible to the screen and hope this is enough. I beg your mother come inside, she tells me, but she just brings the groceries and leaves them in the doorway.
Dear Jay, my great-grandmother Vera had a lily white braid and a pink peony bush that bloomed in front of her apartment. These are the only real memories I have of her, and I have been uprooted for the 9th time this decade, moved to a house with a pink peony bush in the yard. My history is told by women standing in front of peonies, balled up tight like a fist until they rupture, body torn open in the sun.
Just checking on our time. Oh, okay, we're good, I think. So here we're getting into another little tragedy, just letting you know about Chernobyl. And for those of you who don't know, it was a big nuclear explosion accident that happened and continues to affect people through the radiation that they carry in their bodies. This is April 26, 2020, which is the day Chernobyl happened in 1986. Dear El, I went running for the first time in months, and save for a few mask-covered faces, things looked mostly unchanged. The couple kissing on a bench overlooking the water was probably just as in love. The college girls in neon pants sipping iced lattes, just as young, even more careless, and the mothers just as worried about their children. But no, there were far less mothers, almost no children. Along the 5-mile stretch of river trail, all 4 moms with kids in strollers and on bikes wore masks. We made eye contact like sharing a secret, like Chernobyl. When poison light fell from the sky, turned air into the monster under the bed, parents tell you isn't real, but you feel it under the sheets. What did yours tell you about the blast, its aftermath? Mine remember being told nothing, watching others watch the air catch fire, a magic only children see. I imagined the dark cloud moving closer until it shadowed the Dnieper black. But we were lucky, Mama tells me. Wind blew the monster west. I didn't see it, she says, but our cousins evacuated Kyiv, burned their clothes before entering our house, and stayed for months. It was harder to breathe uphill, especially the stroller nearly rolling back against my weakening weight, the Batman fabric ballooning at my lips, out and back, wet and heavier with each return to skin, its own small mushroom cloud, black and ignited with what tries to save us. Each inhale, exhale, deliberate, a reminder to be grateful, to hold each other's gaze an instant longer, Elle. Dear Mama, this air is invisible to everyone but us.
Dear Jay, my parents talk about the vodka, how a cousin showed up at their apartment with a car full from government officials who gave it out to his village in an effort to get people to stop drinking radioactive water. I've been drinking more than I should, but I'm measuring everything by imaginary numbers now. 13 is the real number of weeks my mother was pregnant when the explosion happened. It'd make a great superhero origin story if my superpower was something better than the ability to get cancer faster than the average man. My father has gotten it twice now, and this time I don't know how the saga will end. A burning building? Sure. An evil villain with a plot to ruin the world? Most definitely, though none of these things feel imaginary now. My real superpower is that I can become invisible. My body, a series of empty spaces that when opened reveal another series of open spaces. There is nothing here. You can't even walk around because there is no floor and no rug, and yet so many versions of myself have gone in and stayed.
Dear Elle, I can't stop wondering which one of us it meant will die. Our ancestral certainty that the worst will always come to pass, that nothing passes through the house without leaving bad luck behind or taking parts of us with its departure. Pecks in the wall and scratches on top of the bathroom. The bird did that, my son reminds, when early morning sun cracks the small window above the kitchen sink where the orchid's been dying for years now. Yellowed and unbloomed long before the blackbird wormed its way inside to tell us in these walls, death is as inevitable as light.
Dear Jay, I recently read the results of a poll stating that out of all religious groups, it is the Jews whose faith has not increased since the start of the pandemic. And I whisper out into the cold air of the internet, you don't get it. My God, I've never understood the word faith, which has always felt like a dial we are constantly turning forward and back. God breaks me apart in a hidden language when I am so often fractured. I say the closest thing to a prayer that a Soviet Jew has ever been taught. Thank you, please, thank you. Putting on my house shoes and walking onto the balcony, my dead grandmother glowing in the moonlight.
Dear Elle, I've been thinking back to that time we shared vareniki, kompot, and those rye toasts, each with a different smoked fish from a lost part of a childhood neither one of us really recall. Remember how we counted abortions, compared whose ancestors had gotten more and why, as though they needed us to justify a past that asks for no forgiveness. I, an only child by choice or circumstance. I felt nauseous for days now, so this morning I bought the only milk gallon left and a 2-pack pregnancy test. Life wants to grow, Elle, despite itself. My husband's body broken everywhere besides this. The president said if abortion clinics can stay open, houses of worship should too. Faith, its own unforgiving scalpel. I already found the closest clinic, already read about the ways it can be done. We try to write a tomorrow different from our parents, but the page is sand on the banks of our red or black or dead seas, and no matter our marks, water or wind returns it always to blank sand. So when no blue line appeared, I called my mother. I told her how much I want to be near a body of water stronger than history, told her how much I miss her arms.
Dear Jay, every once in a while, I am reminded that people want us dead. At the mandatory anti-Semitism seminar at my work, the discussion leader gently reads a bullet point on a slide titled, Common Myths About Jews. This particular point clarifies that we do not, under any circumstances, use the blood of Christian children to make our matzo. And I'd like to say that I laughed and said something witty about being too busy controlling the weather to do much baking, but Jay, the next slide was another clarification that we in fact do not control the weather. Though this secret, Jay, I will tell you about one week in October when my son wanted it to snow so badly that we spent hours cutting printer paper into snowflakes. The floor covered in scraps, taping each window with its own mosaic until we got tired of cutting and opened the door to an unexpected snowstorm. Snowflakes everywhere, powder falling where powder shouldn't be. Running outside, unblinking, he caught a few flakes in his eyelashes, and he did cry in overwhelming joy, convinced that the sky was connected to his imagination. The snow, Mama, just as I dreamed it would be.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very moved. We have time for some questions, and I wondered if anybody would like to go first. I know there were some of my own students had questions.
Emily, thank you for coming today and visiting our school. My question is, what do you guys think that is the solution to crimes against humanity?
It's a very big question. I'll just say, I think that neither of us think that a poem can stop a war or can save a life. I wish they could. However, the ability to put your emotions, your stories, your songs on the page and let them resonate and let them reach someone else, it makes a difference. I think poems do make a difference. They change hearts, they change minds, they make you feel something. And so while they cannot save humanity, I don't know if I'm trying to save humanity. I'm trying to maybe reach someone, one person. And for me, that is enough.
Yeah, I think a lot of times I'm just trying to save something inside of myself, and that might feel really small, but that also could also help save someone else in a different way, right? And it's not like, if you're drowning, it's like, here's a poem, but I do think there is something, there have been very difficult parts of my life where I did cling to the poetry. And so, in terms of, to go back to your original question, like, what's the proper punishment? I don't know. I'm not I think, especially as a writer, like, I'm not really in the business of punishment. I'm in the business of of the art and the trying to, again, trying to pull myself out of some dark abyss. Cause I can get there, man. I sort of sit in the darkness quite a bit. And so Yeah. So,
And I think for us, this book was quite saving. I mean, it saved us because we were drowning in parenthood, in work, in survival, and this allowed us to hold true to the artist part of us, and not just the part that is the mother, that is the teacher, that is all these other roles, but like the artist, the creator.
the human.
Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you. And we have another student here who'd like to have a question. Day?
Hello, my name is Day. This question is for Luisa. I wanted to know, like, how do you decide when you should use humor to soften a moment or when it should sharpen it?
You know, I'd love to say that I've got a formula or a system, but really it's kind of just like, I think a lot of times the humor for me is this like life-saving thing. Like it's how where I'm from, Odessa has this like rich history of using humor in the face of oppression. Like that is like what the city is known for. So a little bit, it's just sort of, my blueprint comes from where I'm from, the sort of the giants that stand before me that have made jokes in the face of oppression, because there is power in that, right? And so I think for me, it's not so much a decision as this sort of life-giving, life-affirming force of like, I don't know if the humor is being served to cut. A lot of times the poem reveals itself to me as I'm writing it, quite frankly. Like kind of when I read the My Mother is Tom Cruise poem, I had spent years trying to write about this history of family violence that I have, and it wasn't until I started imagining my mother like winning an arm wrestling tournament, or like pulling a mask off like they do in all the Mission Impossible. That's when I was like, that's really funny. Now maybe I can get to the really hard thing to say out loud, that I also in that poem don't fully say, but it's still, I feel like I get to that zone. So yeah, great question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is David.
Hey, David.
I forgot which one it was. One of you said that you don't know Ukrainian, right?
We both.
Oh no. Does that ever feel like distancing from like your past, I guess? Because you can't really like, I guess, understand it as deeply as you could if you did?
So just a little bit of historical context on language in terms of Ukrainian and Russian. Most Jews did not speak Ukrainian because Jews weren't allowed to own land. So Luisa talked about these histories, right? So in the Pale of Settlement, Jews couldn't own land. Ukrainians often worked the land and worked the farms and spoke Ukrainian. And Russian was the language of like the national language of the Soviet Union. Right. And so they spoke Russian and Yiddish. And so for me, it currently feels like it distances me from the people writing there right now. And I would love to be more connected and to know more Ukrainian, to connect with that. But it in no way distances me from the history, because our history is not one of speaking Ukrainian.
Yeah, very similar answer. And for me too, because Julia writes more in Russian than I do, and I don't even really typically write in Russian. For me, writing in English and having these poems that are sort of straddling like both deeply American themes alongside Ukrainian themes and Jewish themes and all these sort of things, to me, I am making my house in a new way, right? Because I'm also a poet who writes like I learned English. My family immigrated, and I learned English off of watching the Ninja Turtles. And so for me, like I use the word dude in a lot of my poems, right? Because that feels like my language that I inherited in a way that feels natural to my work. So I think those distancing things, I wish I had more of that language like Julia, and maybe down the road we might obtain more of that language. But it's also, I think we're working with what we got.
For me, I learned from the Power Rangers. Yeah. So, you have your show.
Kind of show.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, like, since you both know Russian, is it like a bit, I don't know how to say this, like the juxtaposition between knowing that, I guess, Russians, at least in the States, are seen as kind of like an enemy type of deal, and like you knowing that language so intimately and growing up with those cultures, is it like, damn, am I like kind of related to the bad guys in a way, or?
So maybe I'll share a story, and this is a poem in my book, but when like a month after the war, the full-scale invasion began, right? The war began in 2014, but the full-scale invasion in 2022. My son and I were out on the playground, and we were speaking Russian, and a group of middle schoolers came in and asked, "What language are you speaking?" And he said, "Oh, we speak Russian." And he said, "Russian? Oh man, Russia's bombing and murdering." And my son was 6 at the time, right? So these middle schoolers are telling him about the bombs and the murder. And he's like, "You know about that?" And my son's like, "Well, my mom's from Ukraine. We're not Russian." He knows this. And they say, "Whoa, good thing she got out." And my son says, "Oh, she came a long time ago." And so there's this cognitive dissonance might not be the right word, but the perception of us as villains is not one that I personally feel. For me, Russian is my mother tongue. It's the language I grew up hearing lullabies in and watching cartoons, and it's the language in which I sing to my children. And so I can very easily separate Russian as the language versus Russia as the aggressor, for me.
And I think too, everyone has a personal relationship to language, and like nobody gets to take that relationship from you, regardless of what sort of happening. I would say geopolitically, at least for us. Yeah.
And just to quote Paul Celan, who was criticized for continuing to write in German after the Holocaust, and whose mother was, murdered in the camps, and he was in the camps, or actually, she might have been murdered in their apartment. I might have gotten that wrong. But he said, one thing remained certain in the face of tragedy. Like one thing remained unbreakable. I'm butchering the quote, but that thing is language. And so he did not want the oppressors to take away his language that he wrote and composed poems in. And he did not want it to take away Goethe and all these other writers. And for me, I don't want it to take away Anna Akhmatova. Her work is life-breathing.
Marina Tsvetaeva.
Mandelstam, who was Jewish and writing in oppression. The language cannot be taken away. Thank you for that question. It's a great question.
We actually have some questions online. The first is, first of all, there's been some people who've said, thank you very much for sharing such meaningful insights. Here's a question. Could you or both of you speak to, if your partner or spouse's families were not refugees, how do they understand the language of your family?
I think, I'm lucky enough to have a partner who's really quite curious and comes into my family with the intent to know our stories and love us and sort of the many layers of complexity that makes us who we are. There are things that, having a partner who comes from a different cultural background or speaks a different language, we are enriched in each other's worlds because thanks to my partner, I have tried Jell-O salad, right? And he has experienced the proper way to he got a watch recently. He was given a watch, and my dad's like, "We got a drink for the watch. You got to break in the watch, right?" And it's just like, or like maybe the first date. My grandmother actually happened to be at my parents' house. The first date, my now husband picked me up. My grandmother spit on me to ward away the evil spirits, and he was just like, "Did she spit on you?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, because of the evil eye." And he's like, "I'm sorry, the what?" And so, but I think we become there is a distance, but it's also kind of the joy of exploring and getting to know each other, right? You will have no greater time than explaining the absolute weirdness of your family to someone from a different family who also has their own cultural weirdness. And I think there's something really beautiful in that. So in my experience.
And I will say, I was married for a very long time. I am divorced. And I think my ex-husband came in with curiosity. And then it became something that really distanced us, particularly me speaking Russian to my children. My daughter just recently said to me, she's 6, she said, "Papa says you were mean because you would speak in Russian to us around him." And this was a choice we had made together, that I want to raise them with this gift of language. But it felt very kind of ostracizing and separating. But my current partner is a wonderfully invested and supportive and deeply engaged in the history, and has, you know, met Luisa's family and tried our really bizarre food. We have meat jello.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an
tried the meat
incredible,
jello.
you got to try khaladiets, right? So we bring, you know, they bring jello salad from the Midwest, we bring meat jello.
So here are two questions that are about the craft of writing. One is, do we write poems for ourselves or others? And the other is, what is it like to earn a living by writing poetry? Is it sustainable? Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to publish and this sort of life?
Sure. No one earns a living writing poetry. Let's just be clear. We earn our living in various ways, but I think I chose a career in academia that enables me to get to write poems. I get to write poems alongside my teaching, which is amazing. It's a gift. But I would say very few, not no one, but very few people make money off of writing and publishing poems. It is events like these and teaching our students and doing other talks that are the kind of financial sustenance.
Yes, I would agree with that. And then too, like, I think for me, like, I have a job, I work at a high school, and I get to teach. Like, I do genuinely believe I have one of the best jobs in the world, because I get to talk about books all day, and like, I get to talk about poems all the time, and I get other kids excited about poems. And so while I don't necessarily make it, like, I'm not dripping in cash because I published, you know, a poem. And
She is
dripping. And I felt pretty generous. I recently published somewhere, and they're like, we could pay you, or you could, you know, donate it to the journal. And I was like, well, you know, donate away. So I do think maybe not like that financial piece, but very much you can dedicate your life and living to poetry. And I know in a lot of ways we both have, right? So.
You just have to find a career that sustains you. And I felt I could not produce writing doing a job that wasn't intimately related to writing and intimately inspiring me. And the question of, do we write for ourselves or others? Who's the famous person that said poetry is meant to be overheard, not heard?
Yeah.
It's a famous quote. And I think that's very true, is that you're always writing for yourself, yes, but in terms of once you decide to send that work out into the world, there is a craftedness to it. There's a big difference between a diary entry and a poem. And that diary entry is very valuable for you, but it might require massaging, revision, craft, a lot of effort before it connects in the way that you want it to someone else.
When I die, if anyone publishes my diary, I will haunt them, because that's for me. That's not for the world. Anyway.
As a raptor, will you haunt them as a raptor?
Maybe. Just like it's a tired.
My name is Jada. You kind of answered it a little bit of my question at the end of your statement, but it was, when writing poems, which part of it is more challenging? The emotional part when writing about yourselves and family and then forming it into words, or the witty intellects that you have to think about to form it into actual poetry to make everything flow and come together?
What's harder? I don't know.
Well, what's harder, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Yeah, I think every writer is different, has a different process. Like, I am a writer who, I often start with image. So like, I saw that peony bush and I was like, baby, we have a date later. I'm gonna write a poem about this. And so but I often start a poem and I don't know where I'm gonna go. You know, and so occasionally I'll be like, oh man, like I'm at Costco and there's a sale on croissants. And then I end up writing a poem about the difficulty of parenting children when they're sick, right? Like, that's not what, I didn't sit down and be like, I'm gonna write a poem about the stomach flu. Started with a croissant, and somehow I ended up thinking about being a caretaker, right? And so I think for me, I'm always sort of walking around with my eyes wide open and just sort of like constantly walking into just one inspiring image after another. And if you look at my phone, there's just like long lists of interesting images that I sort of run into, and then eventually some of them become poems. Yeah.
And I'll say for me, it's often sound driven. I'm very musical when it comes to the poem. And so I will also often start with an image, but oftentimes the way the poem moves is very driven by sound. And just to give a little Robert Frost quote, right, to echo what you said, no surprise for the writer means no surprise for the reader, is what Frost said. And so I do think, like, let your poems be wild, or your prose, whatever it is you're writing. If you know where it's going, your reader's gonna know it too. And so let them go wherever they're gonna go. Follow the sound, follow the image, follow wherever it leads you.
Hello. Privyet. My name is Armani Velez, and I resonated with your history a lot because two of my best friends who I've known since I was like 7 years old, Vincent and Daniel, my friend Vincent's Ukrainian, my friend Daniel's Russian. So I find it kind of ironic. They're both in the military right now. So I sometimes take it upon myself to really understand their history for them. And I would always want to ask them, do you know about your family's history? Are you in the army because you love your family or because you love your history? So I wrote a question down while I was listening to your reading. And I wrote, you both are talented poets. I had to start it off by saying that. And I noticed that a lot of your writing gravitates around memories of family. And sometimes, often, it's not even technically your memories, right? Memories of people who have passed. So I wanted to ask this is kind of like a branching out question. How long did these feelings and these memories that aren't your own fester inside of you before you wrote it? And what advice would you give to writers and poets trying to find their voice in their writing?
It's a really good and big question. So I was chatting with Allison before the reading started and just talking about my son, and he's a third grader, and like slowly rolling out the Holocaust, because so much of our family history is tied to that. But like, how do you introduce that? And it occurred to me, and this is the tricky part of being a parent, is like, I don't remember a part of my life that didn't include the Holocaust. I don't know a part of that without that sort of familial history and memory being so present and so much a defining feature of how we as a family move and operate, right? So for me, I wrote my American Radiance, my first book. A lot of it is about family, a lot of it is about that history, and a lot of it is about my family coming to the United States as immigrants. And then I was like, whew, got it out of the system. Next book, it's gonna be me or something different. And the next book, I think, is even more of that. And then as you heard from this current book, the book that's forthcoming, even more, right? So I think it is a lifelong process, because for me, I can't separate that family history or those stories from who I am to myself, right? And so I'm slowly rebuilding myself through stories that I grew up surrounded by. That's my take on that. Yeah.
And I will say I felt so much kind of onus and pressure to tell my great-grandmother's story because I grew up with it. She was a huge influence. And I, like Luisa, thought too, I'm like, I will be done with telling her story. When I have children, I will write about something completely different. And what you don't realize is that having children makes you look even more deeply at the past all the time. And particularly in Jewish culture where, and you heard me talk about this in my poem, but we name after our dead. Like every child carries these memories. So it's a real cultural aspect to carry our dead with us. Isaac Bashevis Singer said, we're all walking cemeteries of our dead. And so I really agree with Luisa in terms of I don't remember a part of my life where I didn't know that there were missing relatives and that we have this history. Yeah, so it's not so much a choice, but a thing that we are compelled to constantly inherit and engage. Thank you for that question.
I wanted to follow up with that and just mention, thank you so much for such a beautiful reading. One of the things I deeply appreciate about this reading too is just the support of each other. And that's a thing just to celebrate as well, your friendship and being that support. I wonder if you also if you'd want to talk about that, but also the sense of fierce women. One of the things I appreciate in both your poems is this kind of subversing the feminine and really like, these are real people. Would either of you want to talk about either of those questions, please?
I'll briefly talk about the friendship piece because that is something I really strongly believe in, especially for young writers. Like I have a MFA, I have a doctorate, and I often get asked by students who are looking to either go get an MFA or go get a doctorate, like what's the point? Like what's valuable? And I do say it's a lot of that work is finding other writers who you trust and love and care about, because a lifetime of writing you need that partnership. At least for me, I have friends who I have gone through school with who no longer write. They just sort of disconnected themselves from, and I am not a wildly connected person in the writing community, but even just having a couple friends who I deeply trust that sort of remind me like, hey, like, I'm going to write something. You want to write something? And just having that person there, that sounding board, I think is enormously valuable and important. So I always tell them, like, what you learn is so important. All of your craft classes are so important. Writing is so important, but also finding people that can see you and that you're going to go through life with. And I have close people that I have met through the years that I'm like, they are helping me continue to live as a writer. Which is, again, obviously we wrote a whole book together, but like Yulia is absolutely one of those people. But finding that community is so valuable, I think, if nothing else.
And I think it helps you know that what you have written is a real thing. Yeah. It's not that diary entry. Luisa's 100% of the time my first reader. I finish something, I'm like, just shoot it as a text. And she doesn't need to give me feedback, but I know that there is someone out there listening and feeling this thing that I wrote. So when you look around you right now, this is your community of writers. Like, hold on to them. Truly, they are gifts. And just to get to the matriarch question, I come from, I think we come from a legacy of matriarchs, like these real powerhouse women that I learned from and that I respect and admire so much. And so in my poetry, I'm always honoring them and honoring that strength and, trying to raise my children with it as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think so many of the women in our families are just these powerhouses of fearlessness and strength, and often women who have survived tremendous trauma, historical and familial. And I just, it does help center myself when I'm like, I can do that because my grandmother survived, famine, right? So I could handle, going to the grocery store when I'm tired. And that's actually, using trauma as like a frame of that is not necessarily the best thing, but it does really help you get things done, I will say. So for me at least. But yeah, having these heroes, to me they're heroes, which again, like I sort of was able to portray my mother and my grandmother as heroes because they are to me, so.
And I'll just echo the same thing, especially knowing that they, our immigrant experience, sure, was difficult as children. Yes, maybe we got made fun of. Yes, maybe we got bullied. They came to a completely different place, left all their relationships behind, learned a new language, got careers, and continued to thrive. And I just am in such deep admiration of my mother and my grandmother, who my grandmother will be 85 next month, and I'm really excited about that. And she only stopped working when she was 80. She worked from when we came here, when she was 54, until she was 80 years old in an office doing, really important stuff. So
we have time for another question if someone has a question. Anika?
Hi, wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Anika.
Hi, Anika.
My question is, maybe it might be more editorial, but how did you figure out like your collection of poems? Like, were there poems that you rejected that you felt like wouldn't resonate, or were there any unexpected poems that you feel like would be more meaningful to have in your collection?
I'll have a short answer for you because I just was thinking about this the other day. My first book, American Radiance, was the first book I ever put together, and it went through many drafts. And originally it was split into two halves, and one half was basically Holocaust poems, and the second half was like pop culture poems about immigrating to the United States. And for a long time, I was like, these have to be in separate camps. And once there was one day, I just sort of realized that no, they don't. And so when I started
actually put them together, I realized the poems have been speaking to each other this whole time. And so for me, sometimes I think we get caught up on something like organizing by linear narrative, right? It's like, oh, we gotta start at the beginning and end at the end, and it's gotta like make sense. And for my poems, I have felt like it's a little bit, it's like a crock pot. I'm just throwing all the poems in there, and it's slowly stewing. That didn't make sense. That's not a good reference. But I do think like putting they're marinating. Yeah, but I do think the poem, like, don't be afraid to pair things that might not feel like editorially concise, because sometimes there is a thread that we sort of arbitrarily try to straighten out, and it doesn't work for my work, but yeah.
And I'll just say, as writers, we all have obsessions, right?
Yeah.
So even if you say, I'm not going to write about this thing anymore, that obsession is going to sneak back in your other poems. And so they're talking to each other. There's echoes all over the place. And I think our kind of editorial processes are opposite. It's that I'm an overwriter. I write way too many poems, and then I have to cut away. And Louise is like, I got to fit another poem in there.
Yep.
And so I cut away a lot of poems from my collection because they were doing some of the same work, right? You got to look at the poems that are doing similar work and then pick the strongest one.
Okay, thank you for answering.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think is that all the questions? I just want to thank you both for being here today. Again, thank you to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, to the teachers who brought their students. We are very grateful for all the students and your questions, for being here online. This was a wonderful reading, and I deeply appreciate just your presence as educators as well. Thank you so much, as well as being poets and educators. We really appreciate your visit today.
Thank you both so much on behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center. Thanks to all the students who were here, and thanks to everybody that joined us online. We hope you stay safe and be well. Thanks, everyone.